Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. You are listening and watching Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin. I'm very excited that you are joining us here today because we're going to have a conversation that is not only going to be insightful, but it is also going to be informative and in English, which is sometimes a rare feature on this channel. But today, actually, it's my second stream in English. Earlier today, if you tuned in, or you should check it out, there's a conversation with a couple of wonderful pianists who are bringing about awareness of a composer that many of us did not know about, even if we loved classical music, romantic music, you know, your Chopin, your Schumann's. There's another one with, his name is Bartkevich, Sergei Bartkevich, and he lived about 100 years ago, and there's going to be a concert of his music in New York coming up November 18th, if you're around. But now we are going to transport ourselves to Israel, where I'm very glad to be joined once again by Andrei Yanpolsky, who has lived in Russia, lived in Israel, lived in New York, and now is spending his time in Israel once again. Andrei, welcome to the program.
Hi, Yuri. Thanks for having me. And yes, I am a dual citizen of United States and Israel. I lived most of my adult life in New York. And I've been spending a lot of time in Israel over the past 2 years, and I had lived here a long time ago. So I do speak Hebrew. I don't know how to speak Arabic, in addition to English and Russian, which is my mother tongue. So, and I have read extensively on the history of the situation and whatnot. But that's not what we'll be talking about today.
No, but I think it is important to establish who we are and what brings us about. Let's see. I'm either experiencing technical difficulties, or can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Then perhaps there's a freeze on my end of things. Andrei, why don't you talk about the situation first of all? Tell us about where you are and what is going on, because we hear perspectives from news agencies, from reporters, but it is important to hear your individual experience. What's going on?
Of course, I have been before the beginning of the war. I have been in Tel Aviv, in southern Tel Aviv, to be precise, in the area that borders the heavily populated by Israeli Arabs, the city of Yaffo. Right, so I am on the border between Tel Aviv proper and Yaffo. So as to the situation since the beginning of the war. My personal experiences, there isn't really much to it. There have been missile attacks pretty much daily. Today has been an exception so far. Yesterday we had a raid. The day before there were like several, and it's been going on for like all of these 3 weeks. But this is not, again, too much of an emergency from my perspective compared to what the rest of Israel is going through, especially the areas that were immediately attacked on October 7th. Those are very different circumstances. And towns that border or are close to the border with Gaza, as well as towns in the northern border of Israel. As you can imagine, a city of Ashkelon, for example, or city of Ashdod, those are pretty close to Gaza. Ashkelon, I believe, is about 10 kilometers from 6 miles from Gaza border. And Ashdod is a little, maybe twice as much. So whenever missiles are launched from northern Gaza, and that seems to be where most of the missiles are coming from, the Ashkelon residents, the Israelis, have about 15 seconds to hide in a bomb-safe bunker. And vast majority of them do not have those protected rooms at home. You know, I wanted to make sort of a joke. In Hebrew, the safe space, the communal safe space that people run to, it's literally safe space. It's called Merchav Mugan, and it's literally translates as safe space, right? So because we will be talking about culture and media culture, among other things, that's a different kind of safe space from what we are used to discussing when we talk about, I don't know, culture on campuses or, you know, political correctness, cancel culture and whatnot. Safe space is something completely different. So that's safety from, I don't know, offensive speech or insensitive speech most of the time. In Israel, it is safety from missiles. So I guess that changes the perspective of anyone who would be talking about this today, if from within Israel, and I'm sure as well as like from within Gaza. But I will have to stick to talking kind of as an Israeli in this case, as we sympathize with the plight of civilians in Gaza. I will kind of go through this. Now, as far as everyone has watched the news, I think about 2 hours ago, the Israeli Defense Forces have reported that they have surrounded the city of Gaza, which is inside the so-called Gaza Strip. It's kind of it's an old city. It's a very old city. Maybe it's 4,000 years old or something like that. And it appears that the command and control of Hamas are inside that city. So Israeli military has fully surrounded and besieged it. And forgive me, I mentioned it during one of our conversations that for this like biblical verbiage, right? Like, and they laid siege to the city of Gaza. Well, this is what happened. So I guess it's very hard to shake off this heritage of, the biblical events. They just keep haunting everyone who lives in this land, right? And they are preparing for operations to disarm the tunnels, to destroy the tunnels, to liquidate militants who are hiding in those tunnels, because there are many, and I don't know, probably destroy their stockpile of missiles and whatnot. So I really was looking forward to talking today about the coverage of this conflict, of this tragedy, and maybe what I'm doing here.
And of course, we should probably acknowledge that we are part of this coverage as well. So this is kind of looking at ourselves to a certain extent, because we are contributing to a certain picture as well.
Yeah, we are. Social networks, social media, minor influencers. I don't even know if I don't want to call myself an influencer, but we are a minor source, right? So I was going to talk about the mainstream large sources of information, or important influencers with like tens of millions of views and such, right? And I get a lot of questions from my friends in New York, whether something is true or how to explain a certain thing. And, what I am trying to do here, there was a word for it in Hebrew. It's actually a very, maybe our like Israel aware listeners will know this word. It's called asbara. This means the explaining. Don't want to say mansplaining, but it's kind of when someone who stands with Israel explains its position from some reasonable system of beliefs, right? And humanistic, honorable, and decent positions. Because there was a lot of blame flying around. There was a lot of, it's not even blaming. It's almost like, these are accusations. These are, it's often libel, as the Jews are kind of used to. But I could kind of go through the entire picture the way I see it, right? And I will start with saying that what I would want to avoid during this conversation is the conversation which is very typical about the history of the conflict. And usually there is this one point of view that, let's say, the pro-Palestinian camp, if you want to call it that, has, and the other one is Israeli, and it's like, oh, this land was empty. Oh no, it was inhabited by the Jews, and then 1,500 years ago the Jews were expelled by the Romans, and then the Arabs moved in 200 years later, and then the Arabs have lived here for 800 years or maybe longer, and then there's all this mayhem in Europe, and the Jews are colonizing all of a sudden this land that's called Palestine or Israel in the 20th century, and they start. And if you watch any program by, let's say, a pro-Palestinian influencer, they will absolutely mention the fact that there were like 3% of the Jews in the land of Palestine in 1885 or something like that, 3 or 1% of the Jews, right? And then it grew because all these displaced people from Europe came to Israel and set up the country here. So I don't want to talk about that. And the main reason being that Israel has existed since 1948. And let us for a moment say that it doesn't matter actually how it came to be, because at what point do we stop? It's been 4 or 5 generations ago already, easily, right? The people had grandchildren, their children had children, and so forth for like 4 or 5 times since the establishment
See,
Sorry.
to me, this seems just like almost a misuse of history. Because rather than using history to help us guide us forward, this is using to stop us from moving forward, to use all of this weight of the past. Just me.
I agree with this wholeheartedly. It's basically like we cannot really advance in any argument because we just keep returning to this, like who has inhabited this land first. I don't think it matters once a few generations of whoever lived here. And I absolutely do acknowledge that the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Arabs, have lived here for a very long time. In
See,
1948,
this is again like you're talking about the past, and I'm saying it doesn't even matter how many generations. It's more about the fact that the current generations is not going anywhere, and there's a lot of them everywhere, like on both sides.
absolutely, yeah. That's the most important point is precisely what you just said. That the Jews are the state of Israel is not going anywhere. They. I mean, I have a U.S. passport. I can go to New York, but the vast majority of Israelis do not have a U.S. passport. And on principle, actually, part of the reason I'm staying here in Tel Aviv is because I just cannot abandon my people. I have to stay with them. Like, I will stay here as long as it feels dangerous for the country, right? So anyway, and right, so it doesn't matter. They're not going anywhere. Neither are the Palestinians, the Gazans and the West Bank. The people who live in Jenin, in Ramallah, in East Jerusalem, it doesn't matter. They're staying. Everybody's staying. Another thing we're not going to talk about is, what solution should there be once this round of hostilities is over, this war is over? What is the solution? The two-state solution, the one-state solution, the international coalition force enforcing something in one part of Palestine or another, or Israel. No, there are smarter people who have been looking at it for decades and they haven't come up with a viable solution. So I don't want to pretend that I know how to do it. There are like a few.
Are you sure? That is such a good topic, though, to weigh all the possibilities, eventually arrive at the two-state solution. You don't want to go there? Okay.
I don't know. It's like almost all these plans and all these great ideas about how it could happen reminds me of Mike Tyson saying, of all people, he said, like, I think it was him, like, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So all these plans of the post-war, administration of Israel, of Palestine, not Israel is fine, are like just a bunch of talk. Now, but what we will talk about is the situation. So what is, from the point of view of the Israeli society, Israeli country, and Israelis, and the Jews happening right now, and why they are responding the way they are responding? That's what I wanted to explain as part of my attempt to help, my people explain themselves, right? It's not that they need my defense, but every little bit counts, right? So here's my 2 cents. So let's agree. Okay, there are like unquestionable, undisputed facts that what happened on October 7th, and we're not talking about the savagery or the brutality of the actual attacks or all these like gory and horrible details of how people got murdered. The reality is that 1,400 to 1,500 people were murdered, 250 people were kidnapped into Gaza as hostages, and there were several thousand wounded. The vast majority of them are civilians. Vast majority are civilians. In addition to that, about 30 or more communities in areas bordering Gaza are empty of people. Right now, they have been evacuated for a number of reasons. For example, you are a member of a collective farm called a kibbutz in Israel, and half of the members of your collective farm were murdered on October 7th. There are kibbutzim like that, where half of the inhabitants, 1/3, half, sometimes even more, were just murdered or kidnapped. In general, the place is all, covered in blood and charred remains of what was there before. So there are like large communities and fully evacuated. And then there are towns close to Gaza that have been partially or fully evacuated. Several cities, 30,000 population completely evacuated. Sderot, Ofakim was partially evacuated, Netivot and so forth. Ashkelon, many residents have been evacuated as well. The total number of these people, the word is mefunim. They're not refugees. Israelis are very particular about not calling them refugees. They're called kind of displaced persons. There are 250,000 officially of displaced persons inside Israel right now. They live in hotels, in resorts, in major resort areas, in Eilat, on the Dead Sea, in the center of the country in Tel Aviv. Almost every posh hotel in Tel Aviv is right now full with these non-refugees, Israelis, who don't know when they will be coming back. They just don't know. Now, the harvest, these are farms, these are farming communities, is just rotting or withering on the vine. There are like some volunteers trying to pick the harvest, but it's not really, they're not going to save most of it. Most of it will just perish. And there is a question about what's going to happen next. 250,000 people, and I believe there may be actually more. These are just the official numbers, right? And there's probably more. This is 3.5% of the population, of the Jewish population of the country. To put things in perspective, in the United States, it would amount to 10 million refugees in the United States. Like, that's many. It's very many people. Just imagine that 10 million Americans have to live in hotels on Manhattan, right? Or like in all kinds of strange places that are not theirs. We all remember Katrina. We remember other natural disasters. And this is not a natural disaster. But this is not all. There is more. In addition to, and people may argue that this was just a one-time attack and you could sort of deal with it, overcome the grief, and then come back and recover and come back up and redevelop those communities. Maybe, except there is one more thing. There are daily barrages of missiles. Hamas, at the beginning of this operation that they call the Flood of Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is their main mosque in Jerusalem, which is, some say, the third holiest place in Islam. Others say there is no such thing as a rank of holiness of places in Islam. It's just like a holy mosque in Islam, right? So anyway, so this Flood of Al-Aqsa consisted of several parts of the attack on communities with slaughter and indiscriminate murder of civilians and kidnapping, but also the missile barrages. They had 10,000 missiles. Some of those missiles are very long range. By very long range, I mean at 60 to 100 miles. There have been cases of those missiles reaching about 100 miles from Gaza. And they reach, very reliably, they reach Tel Aviv and destroy buildings here and whatnot. And one might argue that those missile attacks, well, Israel could just develop this magical air defense shield, or maybe not. Maybe it can't, because they would develop better rockets and Israel will develop a better shield. And you'll have this race, which at any given point in time, there will be a certain percentage of penetration of hits of these missiles.
Let me ask you this. We've spoken in the past, and you seem quite confident about the Iron Dome. To what extent do you feel really living there confident? Is this like kind of like it should work, but it might not, or what?
Oh, I'll give you, it is a good question, sadly. Here's why. 2 days ago, there was an attack on the city of Ashdod. 9 missiles were launched, supposedly 4. It's either the entire missile on its main trajectory or something was shut down, but it just fell in its, the whole thing just was disabled, and its engine was disabled, it just fell. So there were 4 hits. It's in the news. It's not, I'm not divulging any secrets here. One hit like a residential parking lot of a building, of a residential complex. So that wasn't such a great, defense rate. Generally, it is. Generally, it is 90+%, 95+% interception rate. But on that day, it wasn't amazing. For who knows why? Maybe those were like different missiles, and those were not huge missiles, so there wasn't a lot of damage. There were like maybe dozens of lightly wounded people, right? No, in Tel Aviv, there were like direct hits, multiple direct hits, not on any given day, but there was a hit here and there from time to time. So if Hamas were launching, instead of 10,000 missiles, if they were launching 100,000 missiles, the situation may have been very different. And of course, the air defense system can be upgraded, but absolutely no, it's not this like Star Wars style impenetrable shield. Absolutely not, even now. And on a bad day, it is pretty bad, as in 4 out of 9, right? So unfortunately, no. Right? It'll get better. And once again, most of the dead and the wounded are not from the missile attacks right now. However, in the city of Ashkelon, people have 15 seconds. 15 seconds. Remember that number. And it's an impossible number. You're just going to probably not run anywhere because it's useless. You'll just wait and play this Russian roulette every day, several times a day. This is upsetting. It's very hard from personal experience. And I'm an adult man.
I can share this short story with our listeners. A close friend of mine he lives in New York with his wife, and he just welcomed his 85-year-old mother who arrived from Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They've been asking her to come out. She's been delaying, but then she finally came out in the last week. And this woman is I guess is very sensitive to noises. It really affects people, 3 weeks, and this was 3 weeks. And I think about all the people, frankly, in Ukraine who've been dealing with this for a year and a half. It's what it does to the psyche. We are very fortunate in the United States not to experience this kind of trauma.
In some parts of Ukraine, it is much worse than this. In others, farther from the front lines, my understanding is it's better, quote unquote, because at least the Russian forces, I mean, they're not too careful.
Right. If they go against Lviv, then it's like a one-time thing. It's almost on the news because it usually doesn't get shot at.
Right. So it's not even that. It's like if they should try to hit some targets in Odessa, they usually try to hit some targets which are not residential buildings, but some like installations, which is also terrible. Like they're trying to hit power plants, right? The Russians in Ukraine. So if people don't live on a power plant, they have better chances of not worrying about, it's still possible because Russian missiles suck. But Hamas. Coming back to
this is a good, important comparison. So please continue.
Well, Hamas doesn't even pretend that it's trying to hit specific targets with its primitive missiles. They're relatively primitive. They used to be very primitive, and people used to laugh it off. But now it's not a laughing matter because some of them carry. I don't even know what the payload is, but it appears that the payloads are sometimes like, I don't know, tens of pounds of explosives, right? Tens of pounds. So it's pretty significant, and it's randomized. It's literally like a lottery. Whoever and that is another thing that makes it different from Israeli strikes in Gaza. And Israeli strikes in Gaza are of very large scale. They are extremely powerful. Of course, you cannot compare the power. The tonnage of explosives discharged on Gaza by Israeli defense forces is like in the thousands of tons, right, of explosive material. But those are directed hits against specific installations and buildings. I'm a Palestinian, and I know that there are no tunnels with Hamas under my building, my building is not going to get razed. It's another story that there are tunnels probably under every building in some areas, right? But we'll get to that. So in any case, we have this problematic situation which does not permit Israeli authorities to just ignore it or build a better fence. Unfortunately, until we have a perfect impenetrable air defense system coupled with a perfect impenetrable fence, there will be this ongoing unknown risk of a disaster of unknown size. And it's a recipe for a very large disaster. In all likelihood, these disasters will just grow in size in the future, right? This is not a 9/11 kind of event, or maybe it is. I don't know. So anyway, so that is what Israel is dealing with. So it is faced with its communities are emptied. People cannot return to parts of the country, and it's a small country to begin with. 3-4% are displaced. A huge number of Israelis are dead or wounded in hospitals. And, it's an existential threat in my books. For any country, it would be. I cannot imagine a Western power faced with anything of this magnitude that would just say, well, let's just, build better defenses. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, it was like an attack on a military installation by Japan. This is worse. We're like, let's just not live on a naval base, right? But here people live in a avocado growing farm, right? And they get murdered. So not an option. Doing nothing is not an option. And there are these missiles. So you have to address the problem at the root. And the root of the problem is Hamas. That is why Israeli official position is that Hamas needs to be wiped out. Why wiped out, may ask you, right? You may ask,
No,
well, why
I think that's not the question that I ask you. I think most people would agree that Hamas needs to be wiped out. I think the question is, can it be done?
I believe that operationally it can be done. It is being done. If you ask whether it can be done without collateral damage, the answer is no, it cannot. If you ask, does this
do you mean by collateral damage the entire population of Gaza?
Not the entire population of Gaza, and that's another thing that I really do want to cover. So whenever they say that there are mass civilian casualties, there are two problems with these claims. First is, who is the source of these claims? Second, what are the true numbers of these casualties, right? In the claims, right now they're saying it's 8,000 civilians dead. Third, how do we know those are civilians? Because Israeli military is claiming that they have liquidated, I don't know, several thousand Hamas fighters in the process. And third, and last, but it's not even last, but it's certainly important, why did not the civilians vacate certain areas? Who prevented them from doing that? Was it like lack of transportation? Was it why haven't they vacated the area, even though the Israeli military has warned them that there would be an operation, which is necessary for Israel to conduct? And very often the answer to that is because Hamas prevented them from doing that. Under the threat of violence, it prevented them from doing that. It's a very frequent occasion. And now you get this moral dilemma, one of those, the trolley problems, or, like, what do you do? If you know that there is a military base of a violent terrorist organization under a major hospital in Gaza, and even though you have warned the hospital and asked them to vacate it, they haven't done it for whatever reason, what do you do? So Israel is, I think, solving this moral problem on a case-by-case basis, and it is genuinely trying to avoid excessive civilian casualties. So accusing Israel of genocide is disingenuous and it's unfair. Why? If Israel's goal were to pursue genocide or some kind of reprisal, so when people talk about disproportionate response, people imply that they talk about a reprisal, some kind of a punitive action, retaliation. So, they killed a bunch of ours, let us now get back at them. This is not what Israel is doing. Israel is solving an absolutely critical problem for its existence, eliminating Hamas. And I think the question of why does it need to be eliminated is actually quite valid, because why can't we just live in peace? Why can't we just agree to something with the Hamas and I don't know, build the successful Middle East together? This has been tried for the past 20 years. And we agreed not to talk about history before, but another thing is that even after this atrocity, even after October 7th, Hamas spokesmen of all levels keep repeating that the flood of Al-Aqsa was just the first episode in their ongoing new style struggle against the Zionist enemy, which will be wiped out. Their goal is unequivocal and concrete, wiping out the state of Israel. There is absolutely no opening for a compromise. They're not saying, well, let's negotiate. How about we'll let half of Israel survive here? No, it's just all of it needs to go. That's what they keep saying now, even after this atrocity. So because the enemy that Hamas is not one that you can negotiate with, it's impossible. It's just a matter of practical reason. You cannot negotiate with them. It's just not possible. They're not, it's all smoke and mirrors. You have to eliminate it.
It's funny because I was just earlier today, a couple of hours ago, having a stream in Russian with Aider Mujdabayev, and we were discussing very similar concept of why it is important to fight Putin in spite of everything, and that is because you can't reason with him, you can't come to an agreement with him, and it just sounds like you're repeating the same things in English about Hamas, and it's just amazing to me because the parallels. But
as much as I oppose Russia's policies, hate Putin, consider the war that he has unleashed on Ukraine 2 years ago, and actually 8 years earlier, in fact, a criminal genocidal act that is much closer to genocide, because Russia is trying to wipe out Ukrainian culture. Israel is not. You have Arab towns. I mean, I live half a mile from one, where like you have everything. I have 5 mosques right here. I hear muezzin doing prayer calls every few hours, right? Like here, we're not trying to wipe out the Muslims, right, in Israel. It's not. And Russia is closing Ukrainian libraries in Moscow, and like forbidding Ukrainian language in what do you call it, in Ukraine, in the occupied parts of Ukraine. So that is genocide, what they're perpetrating there. While I understand that, and absolutely Putin needs to be treated like someone who cannot be negotiated with, he sadly has a lot of resources and a lot of capabilities, and that has to be reckoned with. Not it's not that, like, you know, Putin verstehers, all these like political scientists like John Mearsheimer or political commentators who call for dialogue with Putin. I agree, it's useless. It's like dialogue with someone who will absolutely lie if it suits them, and you will never know when it suits them because their motivation is irrational, kind of. In that, Putin is Hamas. And, you know...
Let me ask you this. Is there just because, again, in Russian, there's a very strong understanding, I feel, that, of course, Putin is behind this. Of course, Putin is behind this.
Are you talking about...
But in English, I don't sense that certainty.
Oh, you mean behind the Hamas attack?
Behind the attack on October 7th, yes.
There was actually a little piece of news that came in today that was discussed on some Israeli TV channels, specifically that it appears that the Wagner group in Lebanon and Syria appears to be transferring Russian air defense systems to Hezbollah. It actually appears to have already transferred a few. The local commentators, the local military analysts say that it's not a big deal. We know how to destroy them, but it adds risk to like Israeli pilots, and it is a hostile act. That is on top of Russia's pronouncements in the United Nations, which are, what's their speaker's name? Nebenzia. He said that he said that Israel doesn't really have the right of self-defense. It has the right to something other than self-defense. I don't remember the exact words, but it implied that Israel is just sort of some kind of an entity that, yes, you should not slaughter them because that will be too much, but what self-defense you're talking about? That's kind of... So Russia is not a friendly power anymore, and this is different. The question of whether they are behind the attack is complex, and I would not be surprised if they were. I have said from the beginning that I believe they may be behind. They may have assisted with advisors, with training and combat certain types of urban warfare and combat training. Maybe they supplied like anti-tank complexes. The Cornet anti-tank complex was used yesterday in Gaza to hit Israeli tanks. It's a Russian-made weapon. It doesn't mean that Russia supplied it because they sell their weapons to everyone, and maybe, who knows, like, but there are like signs. There are so many signs of potential, pointing to potential Russia's involvement, and so many signs of Russia not minding what's going on.
Is this a political decision to ignore it?
In Russia?
In Israel, because if you really acknowledge it, then it's like, you have to do something about it.
Israel have to walk on eggshells for 2 reasons. They previously, like Netanyahu was saying, that we have to be very careful with the Russians because they kind of control Saddam. Saddam is their client effectively, and he sits on Russian bayonets right now. So Saddam is like propped up by Russia, and he does their bidding, anything they want, right? So if you kind of piss Russians off, then they could instigate something from Syria, which is never pleasant. That's one consideration. And they could upset Lebanon, or they could like join forces with Iranians in the north, right? That's one consideration. Another consideration is completely different. It's the fact that Russia has a huge Jewish community. Not huge, not as huge as it once was.
You know, after the last pogrom, I've learned that apparently the number of Jews in Russia is getting smaller and smaller.
It is, but, you know, it appears to be a universal physical law of nature that Russia has some kind of a universal constant number of Jews remaining no matter what happens. After everything, there's always 500,000 Jews left. I don't know how that works, but there are always 500,000 Jews ready to do Aliyah, or contemplating whether it's profitable enough to do Aliyah or not, or whether they should just stay and keep making money in Russia. I don't know. So Russia does have a Jewish community, and maybe even if it's not too numerous, it is noticeable, right? There are like a lot of business people, a lot of in academia. They're like in medicine.
A lot of Putin's friends.
Oh, his personal friends. Sure. Yeah. And yeah. Well, but there are more Jews in Russia than Putin has friends, and definitely Jews are not his friends. And I believe that there is a trend as of late that they are kind of stopping being his friends. There are like all kinds of conflicts on Russian propaganda channels, even among the hosts who are ultra-nationalistic, imperialist Russian supporters, and their Jewish props there. Like they have like Jewish prop kind of guests who are, as a Jew, I say that Russia must defeat Ukraine. They used to be saying that for like the past 2 years, but now when the official line of the Kremlin is that, Israel is criminal, that it's committing genocide, all of a sudden those Jews find themselves in a really awkward position, because suddenly, you all realize, like those Jewish propagandists, they realize that they are surrounded by anti-Semites, not anti-Zionists, anti-Semites. There was just a pogrom, as you rightfully remembered, in Dagestan, which is one of the Muslim regions in Russia, and it's heavily influenced by the Wahhabi Muslims. There are like a lot of Wahhabi mosques there and whatnot. And there was quite a literal pogrom. And actually there was another pogrom, but it didn't happen as such, because in another Muslim region called, it's a very long name, the city of Nalchik, in another region which borders Dagestan, they didn't have the pogrom because I don't think they have Jews there, but they had a rally in the main square, in the main town square, calling for eviction of all Jews. I don't think they found any, or something like, I don't know, but I know from friends, and I have friends who like know Caucasian Jews, the Jews from that region, and they have lived in that part of the world for like 1,000 years or more. Those communities, those are like mountain Jews.
No. I've been explained that those are actually an ethnic group in Iran or something.
No, those are those are Tats. They're all like.
I know, but there's and also when we start saying Caucasian Jews, I think this is just really confusing for some members of our audience, right? So
Jews are
right. I will even add to this trivia. First of all, I think Andrei, you may have misspoken, because you said you mentioned Saddam, but it's Assad.
Assad. Yes.
Right. It's right.
Yeah. Bashar Assad, and yes, he's like Russia's client. Yes, 100%. Right. So those the Germans called them Bergjuden, the mountain Jew. So anyway, those mountain Jews, they I don't even think there are too many, not enough.
I was going to say, sorry, before we would go into all the, in fact, I feel like we need to back out of there. But who knew that Nalchik, actually, another person from Nalchik, that city that you mentioned, actually was in the news today, because famous Russian conductor, Yuri Timirkanov, passed away, was born in that city, 1938. Continue.
Oh yes, I didn't know that. That's right. That was really some deep trivia. So right. Anyway, so we were saying that Russia is not seen right now as a friendly state anymore. A year ago, the picture was completely different. I would even say like half a year ago, or maybe even a month ago, it wasn't as clear as today. And people who traditionally would admire Putin for his like toughness, for his dictatorial, he's a strong man, and some groups of people love strong men, right? Today they say, well, he's a strong man, but he's a son of a bitch. He's not ours. He's like, he doesn't like us. And this is pretty much the word out in the street, is that Putin is not our friend. He's not our pal anymore, which is new. So we were on before we got into this.
Before we got into this, and what we were going to dive into is coverage of all of this, because right. I think that in the United States, there's a natural tendency to show both sides of the story, especially when it is not the one that directly affects us and therefore affects us emotionally. The story still does, but this is not our 9/11. This is somebody else's 9/11.
And while I agree with you that it's good for the press to have objectivity and honesty and intellectual honesty, but at least we addressed the first point that they frame the question incorrectly. It's not that like there is a reprisal act and it needs to be proportionate. I would understand that argument. You know, if they killed 100 of yours, don't go and kill it like a million of theirs, kill 100 or so, right? That would be the proportionality argument. Here, we're talking about something completely different. No one is trying to retaliate, to like murder their civilians because they killed ours. This is not what the IDF is doing, not at all. It is neutralizing Hamas, which is possible. They're like at it right now as we speak, actually. They're in those tunnels. They brought in some new machinery, supposedly. They like talked about it in vague terms on TV today, that there is like some kind of equipment that is supposed to like do something to those tunnels. And it's new.
Well, I'm sure that if one group of people is going to come up with a tunnel network, then another group of people are going to come up with ways to fight it. That's
no, but this is like once you're in the area and you have this equipment, you can like destroy all the tunnels fast. Supposedly there was something that they brought in, just like yesterday. It's like some whatever special. Israel is known for its innovation, so this is the. I mean, I wish we were doing some other innovation, but this is it whatever, right? So anyway, they're fighting right now. But again, the right way to ask this question, is this necessary? Is this avoidable, this operation? The answers are yes, it is necessary. No, it's not avoidable. We cannot afford. There is no peace potential. There are no openings for peace with Hamas, not with the Palestinians. This is a very important distinction. And unfortunately, yes, there will be civilian casualties, collateral damage. Let's call them civilian casualties. It sounds more humane than, but unfortunately, this has to be done. And
how long can this go on?
I'm no military expert, which is probably better because nobody knows.
And I don't know if it's a military question, because I think it's a political question as much as anything. And I think it's almost a societal question, because right now I feel that a big reason for uptake in violence against Jews has to do with all the coverage as well of what's going on in Gaza.
Israel will be undeterred by violence against Jews because of this. Also, in my opinion, this will not be a factor. What will be a factor are several things. The actual military effectiveness of what's going on of the current campaign. If the campaign sustains very heavy casualties, it hasn't. It has sustained significant casualties. 18 people were lost in the past 3 days. But from past history, you could say that given how many they liquidated, they've killed in exchange for those 18, the ratio is still good enough. Again, this is terrible arithmetic, but that's the only thing we have at the moment, right? So,
well, is there like how much closer Israel is to the goal approach?
Oh yeah. No, there was definitely observable progress. Like they entered. Israeli Defense Forces entered Gaza, surrounded the city of Gaza. They are achieving their objectives. Appears to be on time. There's right. If this changes, and anything is possible, it's war. There are contingencies. It's war. We'll talk about it differently. But what could change this timing or this sort of credit of time that Israel has is the are the results on the ground. Again, the analogy with Ukraine, the same thing. Like, they remember how they were talking in spring that if the offensive was going to be ineffective by, I don't know, August or September, then the Allies would reconsider the military shipments and whatnot. So here it's very similar. So far, Israel has been delivering. The military has been delivering. This is one factor that could change the calculation. Another factor is, of course, civilian casualties. If it is proven that there are like enormous civilian casualties, I don't want to put a number on it, but you could imagine. I don't believe the current estimates. They're all coming from Hamas. And I don't think we'll have enough time to talk about like this entire pipeline of BS that comes sometimes into some of the mainstream media on the subject, as well as on other subjects. But there are very serious reasons for me not to believe almost any of it. The Hamas Ministry of Health, it's called the Palestinian Ministry of Health. It's a Hamas outfit running Gaza. I don't believe them. They are known liars, and they're not just by mistake providing incorrect information. They are deliberately doing that. The story of this non-existent bombing of the hospital, they knew there was no bombing. They knew there were no mass casualties. They knew the missile was not Israeli, and yet they reported it anyway. And CNN, BBC, and I don't remember the others, all just swallowed it line, hook, and sinker, and just, so I don't believe them. I don't believe the United Nations refugee service. I wanted actually to have a tiny segment with you now to talk about this. It's called UNWRA, UNRWA. Have you heard about it? It's just some food for thought for our American listeners. Hope it's not too much. So apparently, the United Nations, it's interesting. It's actually quite like mind-boggling for some people. So did you know, Yuri, that there are 2 refugee agencies in the United Nations? 2. One is all refugees in the world, and the other one is Palestinian refugees. There are 2, right? And these are 2 independent entities reporting to General Assembly of the United Nations. The one that deals with the Palestinian refugees employs 30,000 people, 1,000. UNRWA employs 30,000 people, primarily residents of Gaza. 99% are residents of Gaza. So it is part of this Gazan society. It has a budget of $1 billion a year, 1 billion with a B, dollars a year. Just that thing. That doesn't count money from Qatar, from, all the sort from Muslim countries, from anyway. It's just the United Nations budget that mostly comes from Europe. So that thing is larger than almost any other United Nations agency in existence. And it has been out there for 75 years. It celebrated its 75th anniversary like a year ago. This is one of the largest UN agencies, and its sole mission is taking care of Palestinian refugees who live in refugee camps. You have heard this expression, refugee camp, Jabalia refugee camp. This refugee camp is 75 years old. When you think of a refugee camp, you think of a tent city, right? With people, living in tents or in some kind of cardboard box. I don't know, in like refugees in the street. This is a city with buildings. But for the purposes of this bureaucracy, this UN bureaucracy, it is called a refugee camp. And buildings in it are not called buildings. They're called shelters. So Palestinians who live in houses in this city that is called refugee camp live in shelters. So the whole thing sounds more miserable. So this manufacturing, this pipeline of this perception of misery, that is what the UN is doing. Why I don't believe them is because, I'm sorry, they're staffed with the locals, and I don't believe for a moment that it's possible to staff a 30,000 strong organization in Gaza controlled by Hamas without interacting with Hamas and collaborating with it. So I don't believe them either at all. They're not like the UN. You think of UN like some people from New York in suits. No, it's people in suits, but like they're with very different agendas. So I don't believe in civilian casualty numbers until I see the actually verified, objectively confirmed numbers. If those numbers break through certain psychological thresholds, then I think this may change the offensive. This may stop the offensive.
Is there a possibility that the greater number that is being put out there, whether it is based in reality or not, will actually bring to certain desensitization of us to the, oh, look, another 8 million Palestinians died overnight?
Well, I mean, it's not going to be 8 million. There's like, I don't, no. I don't think that's how it will work. If it does happen, I don't believe it will, by the way. I don't think so. But if the actual confirmed casualty counts start mounting into like the thousands and tens of thousands, that's my perception of the psychological barrier is, I don't know, like 10, 15,000 confirmed. That's when the international community will start pressuring Israel for real. Then it will be like the judgment, the Yom Kippur War, the 1973 war. And there was an episode in it. Some people may have seen Golda, the movie, but even if they haven't, there was basically this moment when Israel could destroy an entire army. It was 1973 or 1967, one of those wars. So the United States, Israel had it isolated, this army, and kind of blocked. And it was like 20,000 or 30,000 Egyptian soldiers. And you can, with the aviation, you can just like kill every one of them. Or you could allow them to surrender or maybe march into Egypt. So the United States insisted on not allowing Israel to do that. And for good. And I'm happy, because maybe if Israel did that, it would have been impossible to have the Camp David peace accords like a few years later, right? So thank God. So there is a psychological threshold. The United States or the West are not going to tolerate mass murder, even of military personnel, let alone civilians. So there's a certain limit. Yeah.
What about this angle to this? There's been information has been reported, I believe, by Axios that says that Saudi Arabia reached out to the Biden administration and indicated that in general they are interested in pursuing that great big deal that they had almost got done with Israel that would have led to some big peace breakthrough, which is big part of the reason perhaps why the attack on October 7th took place in the first place, to stop that peace process. And Saudi Arabia now says that, no, we're still interested when this war is over. Is this an incentive for somebody to try to continue this war?
It's an incentive for someone to get rid of Hamas. Actually, everybody is waiting, even when people they don't have the luxury of admitting, like the Saudis don't, or even the Palestinians on the West Bank. They cannot say that we're actually waiting for you, the Israelis, to just finish those people, those like Hamas guys off, because they are the sore, like, in everyone's everything.
This is more like how Republicans are hoping that like all these legal attacks are going to finish Trump somehow, and that will solve their problem for them this way. I see. Okay.
It's one of the better analogies I've heard in a while. So now we have compared Putin to Hamas, and now Trump. Hamas becomes this kind of measure.
It's the axis of evil. I'm sorry. All right.
It's not the axis. It's just like what you compare evil things to. It's Hamas. So like, I don't know.
It's like, I suppose maybe this is how doctors go. Like, where there's this disease and this disease and this disease.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't, as much as I am not a fan of Donald Trump, and I would love for him never to run for president, whatever. I really hope he doesn't win. I would be very careful because in case he does win, I don't want him to think that, Israelis are this ungrateful bunch who just, take favors from him.
That's very smart of you. I can only vote in the United States, so I can say those things about our politicians.
No, as an American, I'm not afraid, but I don't want to incidentally harm Israel. As an American, I can say that he's an absolutely horrible person, dishonest, like crook and whatnot, but I would not compare him to Hamas. There are like degrees to everything. He's not like a murderer or whatever, but it's a great analogy because, yes, like the Arab world, the Muslim world is waiting for this thing just to go away for Hamas, but because they know it's not going to go away on its own, they would be happy if it goes away, at Israel's hands, and also Israel will look a little bit dirty. Those hands will look dirty because they have just like killed also a bunch of innocent civilians, and they will get better negotiating terms with Israel when it comes back to those peaceful negotiations. If this is true about the Saudis, I'm happy. I believe firmly, me personally, that there has to be a peaceful solution, peaceful coexistence between Israel and the Muslims in the region, the Arabs in the region, one way or another. It's impossible to continue for Israel to continue to exist as this American military base in the region, this thorn in the side of the Arab world or the Muslim world. It's not possible. It's not tenable. Like 50 years from now, 20 years from now, this is. It's not gonna end up well without a peace deal of one kind or another. So it's great. We need to coexist peacefully. And again, we're not talking about two states, one state. Somehow there has to be some way for Israel to stay and for Palestinians not to all die out or whatever, right? But coming back maybe briefly to this United Nations, bizarre United Nations agency, I always question the motives of a large bureaucracy. And this is not just a large bureaucracy, it's absurdly large bureaucracy. 30,000 employees dealing with the 5 million recipients of aid, right? But that's not all. 5.7 million Palestinian refugees are like the clients of this UN agency. You may ask, where did they get so many? Like, because when Israel was formed, there were like only 500,000 refugees, period, right? And even if they all registered, it's still 10 times fewer. Apparently, there is a rule in that agency that a descendant of a male refugee is a refugee. I don't know, like a descendant, not a child, a descendant. So apparently, like, to me it looks, and forgive me for like this really politically correct comparison, it's almost like it's like a herd of refugees that this agency is cultivating. They multiply, right? Like I would think that the agency's goal should be like to reduce the number of refugees, to make them like people who are no longer refugees. But no, they have the absolutely perverse incentive to just have as many refugees as possible, because this is budgets and this is power and this is like the administrative hierarchy that kind of feeds off of this. This is insane, and it's not being talked about enough. Absolutely not. Yes, and no one, people are completely oblivious to the fact that this exists. So you kind of have this UN agency with one hand, which is with one hand like perpetuating this misery of the population, and with the other hand, or with the other end of its mouth, saying like, oh my God, like atrocities, Israeli atrocities, Palestinians have no jobs. This agency had a mission to give them jobs 75 years ago. So this thing is as old as an investment bank from Wall Street. It has $1 billion budget, and all it did, it turned 500,000 refugees into 6 million refugees. So forgive me for my rant, but this is important. This is part of the problem. So I don't believe them when they claim, refugees and whatnot. Those numbers are BS that come from them. And the rest is,
Before we move off of this, I wanted to ask you to clarify what you think about this, because I was wondering about that and I don't have an answer. If you have 8,000 or 800 or 8, isn't it still all too many? I mean, it's kind of casualties.
It is. Yes, it is. But unfortunately, yes, war is terrible. I'm completely unoriginal when I say that, yes, war is a dirty business. Why is this necessary nonetheless? There are some ethical systems which would argue that we don't care that you're saving lives by taking lives. So let's not have war. There are pacifist doctrines. There are like all kinds of religions that advocate for that. Among them, some Judaic doctrines. I'm not a member or an adherent to any of them. I don't think as a people, if Israeli people wants to survive, if Israeli state wants to survive, it has to make those terrible decisions. It is a matter of survival. It's not an exaggeration. And I hope I have demonstrated that it is already very serious. And if it's left unattended like another 10 years, the next one will be so much worse that it could end the state of Israel completely, just end it. It won't be like this deepest trauma in the history of the state of Israel. It will be like an extinction level event. So yes, it is. Even one dead person, dead child, it's always a child, right? Even one dead child is terrible. I know. But yes, sure. That's why the Israeli military is trying to minimize the number of civilian casualties. The only answer here from my standpoint, of someone who wants for the people of Israel to live, is that yes, you go and you fight honorably, and you minimize the number of peaceful civilian people that end up killed in the process. But we cannot just not fight. It doesn't work like that. And again, this argument is impossible to win. I know, because there are so many religions, so many, like, billions of people believe in different things with regard to that. But I kind of, as Golda Meir said, it's better to receive letters of condemnation than letters of condolences for the dead Jews, right? It's better to, and specifically in the Judaism, it's not a very peaceful religion. So one of the sayings is that whoever rises to kill you, rise and kill him first. Sounds terrible. I know.
Well, in this case, we're not talking about, anyway, but this is back to who started what. Andrei, I really want to thank you for this. What was that word you said? The explaining of the
Asbara.
Asbara. Thank you for this, Asbara, because I feel like it is an important part of the story that I honestly don't hear very much out there. And so I really want to thank you for being part of our program today. And I want to thank all our listeners and the viewers for being part of today's stream. You're listening and watching Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin. Until we meet again, take care. Have a good one.